Welcome to another Peaceful Solution Character Education Certification course. Everyone can be seated that is in here, is in the auditorium, and everyone that is coming in, feel welcome to find your seats. And yes, those in Mexico that are watching, I see your messages. Hola. Welcome all of those in Kenya, Nigeria, Zambia, and throughout all of the nations in Trinidad and Tobago, Jamaica. No matter how many you say, you're going to leave some out. I know we have a lot of people, and they let me know on my phone up here as the classes start that they're watching. And once again, we'd like to welcome everyone to these classes, no matter what nation you're from, and no matter what language you speak. We're working very hard here at the Peaceful Solution headquarters to help and direct each and every person. So once again, we want to let it be known about downloading our books for free. They're on our Facebook page because it's extremely important to have them. To where you can go along to the lesson plan and take notes and write notes. And we also, on our Facebook page, we have classes available in Spanish already. So you can tune into those classes, and you'll need the books, and we can give those to you. Just message us, and we'll be more than glad to send a link so anyone can download our books. That's our goal, is to get this information into the hands of as many people as possible, because education is the key to bringing peace to our society, and that's what's going to help it. So we're wanting, and technology is helping us with our wants in this, is getting these books into the hands of everyone. It's very easy these days to, when you don't have to mail a book or FedEx or UPS a book, we can just email a link and someone can readily download it. It's very quick and it's very simple. And once again, if you have any problems with these things, let us know. We will do everything we can from our end to make sure you have all the information you need and that you have what you need to learn and then teach also. We left off last week, of course, we were on LP3C, and we were beginning page 57, and we did a review and an introduction into Chapter 3, which is entitled Control Your Anger. And we're going to talk a little bit about this one-on-one. When I say one-on-one, consider you looking in the mirror, that one-on-one conversation you have with yourself. Because controlling your anger, we're going to learn that that is us. There's no other way we can point a finger at anybody else when it comes to controlling anger or blaming someone for anger or the lack thereof. It starts with us. So we need to do a self-evaluation in this, and it's very important that we understand it that way. We're doing a self-evaluation, and we're going to be honest with ourselves and how we conduct ourselves, and that honesty is what's going to help us be better able to control our anger and also the emotions that trigger that anger, which is very important. So here back on LP3C, we're going to reread Procedure 2. And it says, tell students that today they will focus on the emotion of anger and how they can practice self-control regarding anger. And remember that self-control, as we learn on pages 3 and 4, that is the foundation that is needed in developing this positive character. Notice as teachers, we're being instructed to guide class discussion by asking students if they've ever felt angry. And that's something you need to take the time to do. Ask them if they've ever felt angry. You didn't ask them what they were angry about, but you want to get, it doesn't take a long time to do this, but just ask them if they've ever felt angry. Because you're going to be discussing the stages of what it takes to become angry and what the body goes through and how these things take place very rapidly. It's not something that's a long, drawn-out process. It can take place very quickly. And by them being made aware of this process, no matter how fast it takes place, it lets them to identify these triggers. So that's really what we're working toward. And notice this continuing on here. It says, explain that anger is an emotion that everyone experiences one time or another. Now, it doesn't mean they experience it just one time, but one time or another, everybody experiences these things. However, how we handle anger determines whether we are practicing self-control or not. So how we process it. Remember what we read about negative emotions. The outcome and the consequences are determined on how we process these emotions. And we're working right now on the remedy or the recipe or the procedural process to identify so we can do it correctly. Continuing on, it says, instruct students to turn to the handbooks, in their handbooks to page 57 and read the section entitled Introduction and Facts About Anger found on page 58. So we're going to turn over to page 57. And once again, this will be the first page in the student's handbook for chapter 3. The teacher's handbook, you've had a note to the teacher, so we've got all of that done. We've got these lesson plans. That's for the teacher. But this right here is where the students will start. So all the information we covered last class was to prepare the teacher's mind for the bringing of this lesson plan. So it's very important that we read those things carefully. We get those notes in detail, and we conversate these things with our students. Not everything, as the author of the Peaceful Solution would always say, a class goes very well when it's a conversation. When everybody feels like they can have something, something that they're feeling, something they can convey to the class. A conversational class always goes well. It always, and you'll see that we have, even in the certification course, we have 4 teachers that kind of go from 4 different angles. But all of the information that is brought and the ways that they're brought is very important because we're all working together to bring one class. And it's not that we have 4 separate classes. Our goal is to work together so that when these classes are put together for instructional purposes, our class create one class of a lot of information that help everyone to become better teachers because we ourselves attend the classes. Even though we've been through these classes many times, I don't know when a person quits learning and when they quit needing to hear positive things that take you in a positive direction. It's very easy, we talk about the stop sign a lot, but the detour sign also takes place a lot. And it's very easily to get detoured off of doing what is right and getting carried away with our emotions, and that usually leads us into an area to where next thing you know, we're hitting orange cones and going off the bridge. The detour, we didn't exactly pay too much attention to that. So here at the very beginning of chapter 3, at the very top, we read this last week. This is where we finished. And it says at the very top of the page, don't let your anger control you like a puppet on a string. You control it. Totally. Well, by doing that, remember page 11 of the acceptance unit, where knowledge is power. And having this knowledge to be able to control this anger, that's what gives us the power. It's not like you're going to, get bitten by a spider and now you have power. I don't even remember where bats got into things and then super people came up. I don't even remember how those things took place. But it's not a superpower like we think of, these action heroes. It's the power of using common sense, really. It's the power of processing things and keeping our emotions in control when we're making these decisions. And that's a challenge. It's easy to say that we need to control our emotions when processing decisions. That's very easy to say. On the other hand, it's not as easy to do when you're the one inside of a situation. It's a lot easier to stand on the outside and to look into the situation and give guidance and to offer advice. But when you're the one in the situation, it's really easy to get caught up in confrontational things, argumentation, name calling, ridicule. It's easy to offer insults when insults are never needed. And this is what we're working on. This is what we're trying to bring into perspective. As you remember, we've talked about keeping things in perspective. Well, starting here in the introduction, it says someone says something that you don't like. You suddenly feel you have been treated unfairly. You think to yourself, he's so unfair. Who does he think or who does she think she is? Then your heart begins to beat faster and your breathing speeds up as if you've been running. Heat rushes to your face and you break into a sweat. Without realizing it, your jaw tightens and your fists clench into 2 tight balls. You are now officially angry. But now, if you don't go through all of these things, that doesn't mean you didn't get angry, okay? These are I think a lot of people can relate to the heart speeding up, which causes the breathing to speed up. A lot of these things are reactions to another. One thing takes place, so another takes place, so another takes place. But notice here in the second paragraph, and underline this if you need to, highlight it. I underlined this in a purple color to remind me of certain things. Anger is a normal emotion that we all experience at times. So we have to keep that in mind. So if it's normal for us to experience the emotion of anger, it's normal for other people to experience this emotion of anger. Now, it's very important that we don't confuse this with rage. Remember what we've discussed thus far about anger in chapter 2, and we'll go back and discuss that briefly as we move forward. But anger is normal. Anger doesn't necessarily bring harm to someone else. It's not name-calling. It just simply means that there's something you disagree with. Now, when we get into name-calling and insulting, that's anger that wasn't controlled. And we can think, I was just making fun. I just called him a name, like water off a duck's back. Well, does it seem that way when someone does us the same way? Yeah, it usually doesn't. We always want to make it seem light of the things that we do, but when someone does us that way, well, they've crossed the line there. We can't be doing this. It's I don't want to give examples that kind of lift up some of the stupidity, and I'll stay away from those, but we can take things in society and we can reason the most insane things as justification for showing hatred, insults, name-calling, and how we justify our anger, which anger just means you were not in agreement with something that is something that didn't set right with you. We define anger in ways that rage should be used. Whenever things are hurtful, whenever things are done to cause harm, to bring down, to insult, to belittle, that's more than anger. That's a lot more than anger. That's a negative emotion of anger that was not controlled. And that gets above and beyond. And that's what we hope by the time we're done with these second and third chapter that we're in, we will understand anger in a lot better way. We'll have a better perspective of what it means. When a teacher's in a classroom and she's trying to teach and there's people insulting and calling her names and being disruptive, well, and the teacher gets upset over that, there's nothing wrong with that. That's perfectly normal. There's things taking place against the rules. But now if the teacher was to pull out a stick and start hitting everyone in the head, that would be going overboard. We say that, that's not acceptable. But we live in a society where, and I'll give the example, and I don't mean to beat a dead horse. We live in a society to where we have a very popular comedian who said something inappropriate about an actor's wife, and it's due to a medical condition she has. Whether he knew that or not, I have no idea. And then the man who was upset that his wife was called or made fun of goes on stage and smacks the comedian in front of everyone. Now, that's considered inappropriate behavior. But I'm pretty sure I've seen movies with that same man doing very negative things, smacking people, hitting people, even portrayed the life of a boxer in a movie, and no one had a problem with that. So I guess if it's a movie, it's acceptable. That's what we let our children watch. I don't think children really gathered around to watch the Oscars, to be honest with you. But it's very confusing in the mind of a child when it's not okay that he did it in real life, and it was okay that he does it in the movie. And I'll be honest with you, I've talked to children who, when they see clips of a movie, they will look at you and go, is that real? They really, at certain parts in their age, they don't understand that this is fictitious, that these are actors who are just doing things that they're doing it for the camera, and the next movie they're doing something else. And the next movie, they actually think it's a real thing. They really don't know that this is not really taking place. And they'll ask, did that guy really get hurt like that? No, it's fictition. It's not real. And then, well, why? Then you get into a whole, well, that's a whole nother story. Why do we promote these really negative things? Well, that's another story. But tonight we're talking about anger. But once again, anger is a normal emotion that we all experience at times. If you walk up on the stage and you smack somebody, that's rage. That's not anger. Children and adults all experience anger for one reason or another. And that's something to keep in mind, because we talk about children throwing tantrums, but adults do a great job at throwing tantrums also. You let an adult not get what they want or something doesn't go their way, they can throw a tantrum just like a child can. It just goes from, and I'll give an example that I hear a lot. It goes from more of a, I want that toy, to I'm in charge. And I'll always repeat what the author of The Peaceful Solution said. If we had as many people that would say, I am responsible, instead of I am in charge, we can improve society immediately. Because there's a lot of people in our nation, in our society, our communities, that want to claim they're in charge, but they don't want to be responsible. And we see that on a global scale. And that's why the Peaceful Solution is trying to make an effort, and that's why tonight we're starting with ourselves first. It's very important that we immediately start looking at ourselves and what we're doing and how do we contribute to make society better, or how are we holding it back? But once again, there are as many reasons for people to get angry as there are people. Everyone's got a different reason. What might make one person angry might make another person laugh. And I dare say that I've experienced that recently in the last few days, to where people will call it very angry and you kind of laugh at the situation, not laugh because you think it's something the person should go through, but laugh that we take things that are this small, if you can get a camera in that small, and we make them so big. But they're really very small issues. They're small problems. We just need to deal with the little things. As one person said, we need to build a bridge and get over it and keep moving forward, not let the little things hold us back. In life, there's a lot of things that will become challenges to us. We don't have time for the little things to be big things. Little things like disrespect turn into continual broadcasts on the news of nuclear war. We see people dying on a daily basis. We see that on the news. We see that on talk shows. And I've learned, if you watch news in one country and you watch the news in the other country, the news is portrayed very differently. And it's to the point now where countries are blocking the other country from doing news in their country. Why? Why is this taking place? And what does this have to do with anger? Well, if you notice, a lot of times when people want you to get behind their cause, they try to tell you things that cause you to become angry. So join me, we'll conquer this, we'll win. You get behind me and we'll push through. We won't take this anymore. We'll cut gas prices, we'll get them down. You won't pay more than $4 a gallon, I promise. Well, that would be getting them down. Not much, but that would be getting them down. There's a lot of people that are angry right now over that. Why are they angry? Well, because it's hard to make ends meet. It's hard to put food on the table, to pay that much money for gas, and it's hard to fit into a society that has changed so drastically in the last 2.5 years. 3 years, I would say now. We've seen a huge change in society, and people are very frustrated. And the anger is boiling, but saying things and doing things that are hurtful and doing things that are contentious, we should be able to look out in society and see we're not solving problems. We're not fixing things. We went from talking about, we need more things in life, to, we have this huge virus, to now we have countries saying we will nuke the country that's just south of us if anybody does something. This is the common news. Now, 5 years ago, this would have been unheard of. Who would have thought about this? If you don't think the emotion of anger doesn't play into this, and it probably starts out with frustration, disappointment, if you don't think that doesn't play into this, we're fooling ourselves. A person who's compassionate and caring will not launch a nuclear weapon at someone. They won't murder other people. They will find a better resolution than shooting a missile at a hospital. And this is something I tell you to watch. And I say this on a political scale, and I'm not even endorsing countries. I'm not speaking of United States. I'm an American citizen. I'm not promoting or speaking down about our country. But what we see in Ukraine, I want you to notice this. What we see in the news today about Ukraine, and it never stops. A lot of people are getting angry over what's taking place in Ukraine. Russia bombed hospitals. You know, they've done this tear gas or these chemical weapons, and they're threatening nuclear attacks. That could all be true. I'm not saying it's not. But it was just 3 years ago I was watching the very same thing about Syria. But it was a different country. In fact, it was the exact opposite. The United States was the aggressor and Russia was the defender. And I asked myself, how can two things be so similar, but yet both of these countries say they're on the right side of the coin? And there's a lot of people getting angry over this, but people are still dying. No problems are being solved. If we don't fix this on a level of local society, we'll never fix it on a global scale. And you have everybody wants to come in and give their opinion. But I think look very detailed at those who are bringing in their opinions. They're calling for mediators from high levels. But no one has given any answers yet. You shouldn't do it is not enough. That doesn't keep somebody. If you're angry, think about this. The last time you were angry, and if someone said you really shouldn't be angry, did that calm you down? It usually gets people more angry. You know, I don't need you telling me what to do. I know what I'm doing. And in all honesty, when you see here that what makes one person angry might make another person laugh, sometimes we don't put ourselves in the other person's shoes. Remember the empathy we talked about in the character unit, and we express more in the acceptance unit? And we tend not to look at how they're seeing it. And I don't mean get angry with them. I mean, understand, why is this person bothered, and why is it so emotionally charging them up that we now have an issue? The Peaceful Solutions teaching us how to examine the matter and figure out how to control it. And why? Well, look at the next sentence here. It says, although all people experience anger, that's all of us, it can be dangerous if uncontrolled. And that's what we read. I don't want to give you the wrong page. I think it was page 31, but I'll check to make sure. Yeah, page 31. It was defining emotions, and it was the negative emotions. And it said, generally speaking, emotions can be categorized as either negative or positive. Uncontrolled negative emotions are hurtful and can undermine your growth and the development of your future. You notice it says they can also damage your interactions. Well, you know, uncontrolled anger we see brings death. People get upset, and then it breaks out into rage. The care and concern for life goes away. So the lack of controlling this emotion is very deadly. You know, it's just like depression. If it's not dealt with, it just keeps spiraling downward. And anger is the same way. If it's not properly processed, it just keeps getting bigger and bigger. It's kind of like watching a pressure cooker on a stovetop. And it's building pressure, but the lid's not on just right, and you see it starting to rumble. Well, eventually the lid's going to blow and somebody's going to get hurt. And that's what takes place with anger when it's uncontrolled. But notice it also says it can affect the way you communicate and interact. It can also affect the way you feel about yourself. You know, it can mess with your self-worth or your self-concept. It can totally take your purpose that you have, that you know you're supposed to be doing, and it'll totally confuse it to where you want to walk away or give up because you forget what it is you were even supposed to start with. And that's when emotions, when they're going wild inside of our minds, that's when we need to remember that STOP acronym that we talked about. If you turn back over on page 46, and this is really the key, and this is where David showed that billboard many times. Because it's something that we could use every day. But once again, notice it says at the very top of page 46, controlling your full range of emotion requires you to examine your thoughts, evaluate what you are thinking and feeling. So this is very important that we examine. You know, and you think about, well, what does it mean to examine? Well, when you go to the doctor, you know, you think you have a problem. Well, the doctor's supposed to look at you even closer, right? He's supposed to be somebody educated enough that's supposed to look at the fine detail to see what's wrong. And that's what we're supposed to be doing to ourselves. And if we don't see it, we need to get with, you know, a counselor or someone, a trusted authority that we can talk to that can help us to see things in perspective. So we're not walking blindly through life itself. But notice it says that after you've examined your thoughts, evaluate what you're thinking and feeling. Then you need to respond in a way that, notice, is controlled, well-planned, and respectful, regardless of how you feel. Very important. Regardless of how you feel. Just because you're looking at someone and that person is a complete idiot, it doesn't mean you need to say, hey, you know, you're a complete idiot. No, it means we need to consider, why are we thinking negative things about that person? Why are we even thinking to call someone something like that? You know, to say someone's an idiot just means they're not educated. So that pretty much puts us all in a category, right? We all have to be educated. Sometimes it's better, you can call someone an idiot, or you can just say that person needs to be educated more. And just because we're educated doesn't mean we're applying it. So, you know, these things we have to always keep in perspective. But once again, notice it says to stop and identify what you're thinking and feeling. So what's going on inside of me? Then think about your action. Think about what actions your feelings could lead to. Remember, negative emotions can result in harm to yourself and others. But remember, the key word was uncontrolled negative emotions. We're all going to experience these things, but when they're uncontrolled, they can lead to some very destructive results. Even positive emotions, if acted upon without careful thought, can result in consequences. Ask yourself, am I observing this situation accurately? You know, and that's one thing that anger has the ability to do. If you've ever noticed, when you get angry, and I say the ability to do, I mean it can take where you have your wide perspective where you can see the whole thing, and it can narrow it down very quickly to where you get so tunnel vision, you don't see how your decisions and your actions are affecting everything else around you. You just see one thing. And when you get tunnel vision in making decisions, that's negative character. You have to be able to see the wide perspective. You have to be able to see the results of what we're doing and why we're doing it. Whether you're a teacher in a classroom, whether you're a parent with your children, you have to be able to see the consequences of your decisions before you commit to them. And, well, what does that mean? Well, that means before you pick up a stick and beat your child, consider you could lose your children, and it's not right to treat your child in such a way. Before you go out and cuss your boss man out and tell him how much you don't like him, you don't agree with him, you might want to consider that he could also fire you when you lose your job. It's not as easy to come back and go, I really didn't mean that. Well, I'm sorry, but I can't have you here. That's not the attitude we're looking for in this work environment. And remember what our options are, and William covered this in detail. What are my choices? These are positive choices. These aren't choices, well, I could do the right thing or I could do the wrong thing. That's not what the STOP acronym is used for. The STOP acronym is used for weighing the consequences of rewards of your choices, or the rewards of your choices, but you're supposed to concentrate on what can I do to, this fire is getting out of hand, what can I do to bring it down? And even if you kind of picture in your mind that the situation is like a fire taking place, and you have gasoline in one hand and water in the other, and you are in full control of which one you can throw. You just have to make sure that you're willing to live with the choice that you make. And when you throw the gasoline, you have to know it's not going away. In fact, out here in West Texas, we're seeing burn bans to where, you know, just small sparks going down the road from chains are causing huge grass fires. That can be compared to people doing things that irritate other people that, man, it was such a small thing, but look at all the damage it did. You know, in California, you see campfires. They break out and they burn hundreds of thousands of homes. Billions of dollars gone. That's the same thing with uncontrolled emotions. Things start out so small, but the perspective and the purpose of what was supposed to be done becomes so confused in the minds of people, it becomes a situation that you don't think anyone can solve. It seems so complicated, and it gets that way because of emotions. It's because the perspective is lost. Going back to page 57, and of course we talked about the options and then proceeding with the right option. That's what we were talking about on page 46. But back to page 57, at the very bottom, last paragraph, it says, in the previous lesson, you learned about the importance of identifying, evaluating, and controlling your emotion. Very important. We identify the emotion, we evaluate, well, why is this taking place? And then, most importantly, we control that emotion. We bring it back into perspective. We have to do so. Remember, if it's uncontrolled, it becomes very dangerous. You know, you can take the best of friends and they can become the worst of enemies overnight. You know, sometimes you see this with countries where it's like you see one president in office, and I'm not speaking of any particular president, you know, so I'm not trying to insinuate anything, where one president is friends with this country and everything seems to be going okay. Next president comes in and it's like, man, I guess we're going to have nuclear war. It's like, how did we go so far in such a short time? What led to this? You know, how did we go from everybody's getting along to now we're going to have all-out war and we're sanctioning people and everything just seems to be going really bad? You step back and you go, how can we as a global society, how can we live like this? Well, the answer is we can't. Tensions are getting so high, people are willing to do drastic things. And these are uncontrolled things. Well, what can we do about it? Well, who does this start with? This starts with ourselves. You're not going to drive to Washington, D.C. You're not going to go over to Kiev, and you're not going to pull up in Moscow. You know, you're not going to go to Jerusalem or Palestine. You know, you're not going to go to the capitals of some of these countries and pull up and go, hey, hold on a minute. We've got the answer. They're going to quickly arrest you and have you removed. You know, because what is this nutcase talking about? We have to not do it through not only speaking it, but through examples as a society. You know, you're not going to vote negative character out and you're not going to vote positive character in. We have to do it through actions as a global community. And honestly, is time running out? I think time's running out for the majority, but I would never say time's running out for society. You know, you have to have hope, and obviously there is hope. But for a majority, if things aren't done here shortly, we're going to see very devastating things take place. It won't change the fact we need to control our emotions. It's not going to change it at all. But once again, it says you will learn more about anger and how to control it so that even when you're angry, you can make decisions that are well thought out, moral, and respectful. You know, and I can honestly say I have friends who I've always admired. They don't make quick decisions, and I'm not saying that's a negative thing, but they'll literally think about things, and you can tell when you're talking to them, they're trying to process, what's the outcome of this? You know, there's always a lot to learn on that. There's always a lot to learn from people that do things like that. And you want to be more like that. You want to do things to where when you're done with a situation, it's more than just making negative comments or being a pessimist, but we're actually doing things to solve situations. Well, turning over to page 58, we're going to read some facts about anger. And this is probably the first thing that everyone goes into denial over, you know, because this, even to this day, we hear this said. And this is a fact, okay? This is not an assumption. This is not a theory. This is a fact. No one ever makes you angry. You choose to become angry. There's a lot of people, why did you do that? Oh, they made me angry. No, they didn't. They didn't make you angry. You have to choose to become angry. Whether you realize it or not, you make a conscious choice to respond to an individual or a situation with anger. Anger, like all other emotions, is fueled by your thoughts and how, notice, you understand the world around you. There's a lot of times you can have situations, and you can have people that are 1, 2, 3, 4 people involved in something, and you can have 4, 5, 6 people that honestly have the best intentions in mind. But the way they perceive the route to get to the goal can detour a lot of things and can complicate a lot of situations. And all of those people can really have the most beneficial goal in mind. But due to one person taking a left and one person taking a right and one person thinking they should go straight, it starts complicating things very much to where anger becomes involved and it blurs the goal and the purpose. What was the purpose? What is the goal? What needs to be done? The first thing people need to do is put emotions aside and start reevaluating what's at hand. Notice if you think negative thoughts that fuel and justify your anger, then you're making a choice to be angry. Once again, we're throwing gasoline and it builds up to rage. Anger, when controlled, means it's processed. It means whatever you're in disagreement with, you find a way to process it. You don't put it on a shelf. You don't displace it. And what does it mean to displace? Well, we'll get into that in more detail. But it means someone you get upset with, well, you find someone else and you take it out on the person you think is weaker. You must have had a bad day. That's what people say. They come home, got up on the wrong side of the bed. Those are ways that kind of identify anger displacement. If you've ever seen that when someone comes into work and, wow, he must have got up on the wrong side of the bed. Well, it's because they're coming in and they've got this anger and it's burning inside them. They're not controlling it properly, so now they're displacing it with other people. Well, these are things we have to understand first, what's going on, and then we can deal with it more appropriately. And then secondly here, after we realize that no one ever makes you angry, that you choose to become angry, it's a choice. Anger is a secondary emotion. In other words, when someone says something to us that we disagree with, we usually do not feel anger immediately. Although it might seem as if anger is instantaneous, anger is produced by other emotions such as embarrassment, disappointment, hurt, annoyance, and even fear. I would dare say most of the time with situations that I've dealt with, anger is the secondary emotion to frustration, where people are trying to accomplish goals. And like I said, you can have people that are all working toward the same goal. But the perception of how to get there, it can lead to frustration and it can lead to a lot of uncontrolled anger. Well, what do we do about that? Once again, you have to go back, revamp yourself with a perspective. What did the journey start out with? It's like I used to live in North Carolina and I would drive to Texas quite often to come to the Peaceful Solution headquarters for training. And this was when I first learned about the Peaceful Solution. Now, we could have took two different ways. We could have took I-40 or I-20. You'd start off on I-85 and go down to Georgia and hit I-20 and go through the South. Or we could take I-40 and go through Tennessee and Arkansas, get on I-30, and down into Texas you go to I-20. But they merged right at the same point. Ironically, one route was only 8 miles longer than the other route. Now, could you imagine if you have people that start arguing, well, which way are we going to go? I want to go this way. To me, it was all long, dull, and boring, so I didn't care which way we took. I just wanted to get to the end location. I've driven enough in my life that I'm satisfied with not driving much more. But when you get people, and just imagine you start becoming angry, and then let's say you're on I-20. Well, I'm taking I-10 now. I'm not even going to take I-20 anymore. Well, that's great. You're not going to get to where you got to go now. Now you're going in the wrong direction. And you can get to the point to where you end up somewhere where you see, wow, where is it? Oh, this is California. Well, that's great. Yeah, we sure spent a lot of time in getting to the wrong location. But becoming angry about a situation and fighting and arguing about it is the same thing. You can have something so simplistic, you can deal with it, process it, and get to the end goal. Or you can scream, yell, cuss, throw things, drag it out. And after all that's done, you know what you still have? You still have the problem you have to deal with. It doesn't make it go away. No matter how many times you cuss it, you know, it's kind of like when you, and I can say I've seen this growing up, you know, and I seen a younger brother do this one time to my dad. He took a hammer and he back, you know, for you young guys that don't know, you used to knock boards. You'd take hammers and beat them in with a hammer. You didn't shoot them in with a nail gun. I was shocked when one child didn't know that here long ago, that people actually used to drive them in with hammers. And whenever I watch someone hit their finger with a hammer and they cuss the hammer, and the young boy said, well, how did the hammer have anything to do with it? You know, you were the one swinging it. That's a lot of times how when we get involved in situations, we start blaming things that we were the ones in control of it. Just because we didn't do it properly doesn't mean that we start placing the blame on other objects or other people. Because, you know, the secondary emotion, once again, if we identify, remember we talked about triggers and how it starts a process. If we can start better understanding, you know, this frustration, if I don't get this processed, if I don't deal with it, if we don't come to an agreement, this is going to cause more fuel to come to the problem, to the situation. It's going to become more volatile. The anger is going to burn, and you get into name calling and stuff, that's rage. But if everybody can stop and say, well, let's stop. Even when we do a peaceful solution lesson plan, you start out with a purpose and objective. And that's how we're supposed to determine whether we're actually achieving our goals or not, is through our purpose and objective. If we get into a situation, you know, and you end up in California, then obviously you didn't go through your purpose and objective, unless you just wanted to take the long route and see it and come back, which I very seriously doubt most people would do. We can spend 3 days doing something we could have done in 2 minutes as a society. You know, so think about that in our own lives. Because notice here the very next part. Anger that is uncontrolled can turn to rage. Once again, anger is a normal emotion. So if someone gets angry, that's not necessarily meaning that there's a problem. You know, it just means there might be a lack of understanding. It might mean there's some clarity that needs to be given. It might mean there's more information that needs to be offered. But being displeased with something isn't necessarily a bad thing when processed properly. But notice, but the way we choose to respond might be anything but normal or healthy. When anger is expressed in healthy ways, people are able to resolve their differences, notice, in a peaceful manner. Now, where would you ever get that? You can be angry and still resolve something in a peaceful manner? Yes, when it's processed properly. But notice, anger that is expressed in unhealthy ways can result in someone being hurt or property being damaged. You know, it can result in the loss of lives. This is called rage. Rage is dangerous. That's excessive anger. It's uncontrolled anger. There's nothing positive about rage. You will not find anything in society, you will not find anything in your life where you can go, once I reach that point of rage, we settle the matter. No, you don't really settle it. You might prolong it a little while, but you didn't settle anything. You know, it's kind of like when you shoot a missile at someone, you know, or you drop a nuclear bomb on like Japan, for instance. I've talked to people from Japan, and they haven't forgotten what was done to their families. And they still don't rationalize why society thought that this was something beneficial. And some people would look at people in Japan and go, well, where do you get that from? Nobody said it was beneficial. Well, why do so many countries have nuclear weapons now? You're telling me it wasn't beneficial and we did it anyway? Well, that's true. It wasn't beneficial and they did it anyway. Why? Because my gun's bigger than yours, so I win the argument. When I'm angry, I have the bomb, so you can't be but so angry, and then you have to listen to me. But we have to really, you know, we have to get out of our little small boxes we live in and realize that when anger is not processed properly, people suffer horrendous things. You know, I travel to the country of Mexico quite often. I can tell you firsthand, there are enormous amounts of people in Mexico that have every intention of returning Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and California back to the United States of Mexico, which that's what it's called, the United States of Mexico. They have every intention of doing that. Why? Because it was stolen from them and they haven't forgot it. There's a lot of people, they don't call it Texas. They call it Diaz. They still refer to it by the Texas name. And if you didn't know Texas was a state in Mexico to begin with, you should look it up. You'll learn a lot. Remember, they tell you to remember the Alamo. Does anyone remember what occurred at the Alamo? Why should you remember the Alamo? A lot of Americans were slaughtered that day, right? Well, what is that supposed to do for me if I remember it? Is it supposed to make me angry? Is it supposed to educate me on bad decisions? You know, what is that? What am I supposed to remember this Alamo? What is it supposed to do for me? Because when we say remember things in the peaceful solution, it's supposed to be for the benefit of character development. Well, I remember the Alamo. I've read about the Alamo. I remember some Americans were killed because we were in the process of stealing land from Mexico. So I can remember that. I still don't know what was positive about it, and I don't know what's supposed to help me in life, but I remember it. Well, that doesn't help me as much as remembering the STOP acronym, or remembering that no one makes me angry. I choose to become angry. You know, there's a lot of very interesting sayings that you can hear from philosophers in the world. I see them all the time on social media. And I always question myself with, how does that help me on a day-to-day basis? How does that help me keep my character in a positive perspective? You know, how do I, when I read, it's easier to fool someone than convince someone they've been fooled? I would agree with that. But what did that do for me as far as education on helping someone? Do I look at someone and go, well, you're fooled, so it's going to be complicated for me to help you? Because in society, everybody thinks everybody's fooled. If you don't believe the way I believe, then you've been fooled. And that's the way society looks at it. But I dare say, everybody that I've ever met, I've never met one person that says what is taught in the Peaceful Solution Character Education program cannot be adapted and used in every society. And I mean not different countries, but also different religions. We've taught classes in churches, synagogues, mosques. We've been there. We've been to many different countries. And we've discussed these things with religious leaders. But, you know, even those leaders will tell you, well, that's the right thing, but we don't really practice it. Well, why don't we practice it? If we're supposed to be promoting peace, why are we not promoting peace? Why are we promoting war? Because war, when you define it, is uncontrolled anger. It's rage. And if war brought peace, if rage brought peace, why do we not have peace at this time? We don't even have peace in Chicago, New York, Baltimore, New Orleans, Abilene. There's still not peace in cities all around the world. There's sure no peace in Ukraine right now. There's no peace in Syria or Yemen. You know, there's no peace where we look, where we've been warring for years. There's still no peace. I've always said if war brought peace, then Palestine and Israel are best friends because they've been at it for a long time. But notice here, people who are enraged lose their ability to think clearly. You cannot make a sound decision once you are enraged. Once you've given up, that you've lost control. That's uncontrolled anger. And it's important that we realize that. When we get to the point to where, well, now we're name calling, now we're throwing things at people, now we're shooting at people, now we're doing things to be detrimental to someone else, we lose the ability to even process what was the purpose that we had to begin with. What was the original goal that we started out with? And when we lose that perspective, there's nothing beneficial that comes from that. Notice it says they become driven to lash out verbally and or physically. Rage has led people to inflict serious physical injuries on others and even to commit murder. And I can tell you, I, along with other instructors, we've been into many prisons. I've talked to a lot of people that have committed murder. I don't think they're any worse than anybody else that's on the face of this earth. You know, we've all made bad choices in our lives. It's a horrific thing, but I can tell you, I've met many people who got into drugs or, abusing alcohol. They got into something that started the mind to not being as clear. Some of it was just uncontrolled anger. I've met a lot of people that went to prison at, 15, 16, 17, 19, and they're still in prison to this day, 30 and 40 years, living with that one decision they made in the process of 2 minutes or less. And they're still in prison. I have a close friend who is exactly my age. I say close because I talk to him quite often. He went to prison when he was 19, and we're both 49 today. And I think about how much I've been through in life, started a family, had businesses, done all these things, and he's been locked up in a small cell for the same amount of time. Because he made a bad choice. Does that make him a bad person? I've made a lot of bad choices too in life. And we tend to think about, we look at this physical attack, that's murder. Well, that's easy to see. If I shoot someone, if I stab someone, they die. But remember in chapter 2, we talked about physical and verbal aggression? And we read where facts show that verbal aggression can be more detrimental than physical aggression. You can get smacked once or twice a week, and that's bad, but you can be cussed and screamed at every day of your life. Bullying, when it leads to teen suicide, is very seldom physical. It's mostly verbal. And it mentally breaks people down to where the purpose of life is even gone. So once again, rage has led to people inflicting serious physical injuries on others and even committing murder. And we tend to think about, is it murder if I drive someone to the point through verbal aggression that they take their own life? Well, they've changed the laws in the United States to where now you can be charged with murder. If you bully someone in school or even in the workplace to the point they take their own life, you can be charged with murder. That's now a law in the United States. It was changed. But notice at the very bottom of the page it says, we create our own anger by the way we think, our attitude, and our choices. That's extremely important. We actually create the outcome of this anger, the way we're processing things. We can live in a very fictitious world also. It's very important that we deal in reality because we can create situations around us to where when you stand back and look at it, you realize, man, I was way off. I was calling the sky, the sky was green and the grass was blue. It can become very confusing when emotions start blurring those thoughts. We can call things that are wrong right and things that are right wrong. We can take the thing that was actually supposed to be the final goal and start making it sound like it's the craziest thing on earth. We can really be very destructive in the way we make these decisions. Looking over to page 59, if you'll notice back in procedure 1, that's not in the procedure, but procedure 3 starts with page 60. So we want to make sure we get through page 59 before we get to the next procedure. And it says at the very top of page 59 that anger can come in many different forms. There is mild anger and intense anger. Here are some words and their definitions describing the different intensities of anger. You notice it's called the many faces of anger. And then you have, resentment, a feeling of indignant displeasure or persistent ill will at real or imagined wrong. Real or imagined wrong. Well, how can I imagine something wrong? It's either right or it's wrong, right? Have you ever imagined, I bet that person's talking about me. I bet that person's putting me down to that other person. I know, and I can even tell you what he said. And then when you find out they were talking about what they're eating for lunch that day and wondered if you want to come along. There's examples we have about a young man standing at a water fountain we'll get to as we proceed through. But it's very easy to start imagining things, and we start making decisions on these things like they're true. Well, I got to do this because this person's going to do that. Why do you think they're going to do that? I just know they're going to do it. Well, what do you have that tells you that they're going to do that? Intuition. Well, intuition doesn't always work. But resentment, then you have outrage. Notice an act of violence and brutality. Anger and resentment aroused by insult or injury. And this is outrage. Then you have fury. A person's violent temper, intense, disordered, and often destructive rage. Destructive, and it's easy to see fury, and you can tell if you're looking with me on page 59, this was all done before the world of emojis. This was peaceful solution emojis back in the 90s, okay? Because obviously there's some emojis here that wouldn't agree with what takes place today. But a person's violent temper, and when you think about destructive, and rage and intensity, if you had, and I ask you for yourself, if you had to describe what it would be like to have a missile dropped in your city or a bomb dropped on your city, I would say that would be pretty violent, pretty intense, and pretty destructive. Then you have wrath, strong, vengeful anger or indignation. And you think about this vengeful anger, well, it's retaliation. It's displacement. And then, of course, you have rage, a violent and uncontrolled anger, intensely and openly displayed. Intensely and openly displayed. You could use a movie actor going on stage and smacking a comedian. You could use that. You could use one country, getting a bigger gun to shoot the next. Whenever society begins to lose focus on what brings peace, that these faces of anger are always showing. And I want to endorse our leaders here in the United States for a moment. They're great examples of this. If you ever have the opportunity to watch C-SPAN, you'll see some senators, congressmen and congresswomen, they'll bring their charts, and they will start insulting, screaming, yelling, accusing. And I on occasion, I'll watch this and I think, man, this is who we voted in to solve our problems? They're not going to have any solutions to these things. And they'll scream and they'll argue and they'll carry on. And they already know that there's 52 votes to 50 votes or 49 to 53 or so forth. They already know what the vote's going to be. So it's theatrics for days on end. And they already know what the outcome's going to be. And we're paying $124,000 a year to watch theatrics when we know what the outcome's going to be. Well, I only say I endorse them because it's a great example of how even leadership can fail. And I'm not saying any one person. As an institution, as a society, we're failing. Not blaming our leaders here in the United States alone. We as a society need to come to a better mindset on how to deal with these things and identifying what we're going through. If you look over to page 60, we're going to stop. And this is where William will pick up next class. It's a great part to pick up on, and it has an example and also an assignment that he'll explain. But it talks about how anger can hurt. And we talked about tonight, we're not keeping it in perspective, where we take the little things and we just blow them out of proportion. And after we blow them out of proportion, they still got to be solved. So please keep that in mind. Put that to work in your everyday life. I'm speaking to myself. We all need to work better at keeping things in perspective, remembering what the original purpose and goal is, and working from that point on, and not letting these emotions control us, but controlling our emotions so we can have a more peaceful environment. And when we do that, everything is more successful. It's more beneficial. It grows faster. And everybody has a greater enjoyment. And that's what we're looking to do here at the Peaceful Solution. So once again, we're going to stop on page 60. William will pick up with procedure 3, and that's anger can hurt. So once again, thank you for joining us, and our next class will be 410. That'll be this coming Sunday, and it'll be at 5:30. So once again, thank you all for joining us.